So I was sent this interesting article from one of my patrons on Patreon that's coming out of San Francisco. And of course, you know, the most recent thing that came out of San Francisco was the controversy about them not wanting to pay $5 million to Foundation of Black Americans in the city of San Francisco, thanks to Amos Brown over at the NAACP, who of course has made his grand entry into the Bed Bucking series last week or a couple weeks ago. But something has just recently come out where it has been stated that reparations for Black Californians, those who qualify, could top $800 billion. Now, that's a lot considering that I believe they said it's only 5% of people in San Francisco, but this says for California. This is not just for, as far as I know, because I haven't read the article yet, for the city of San Francisco. This is for the entire state of California residents who qualify for it, which I thought was very interesting considering how low of a population it is of Black people, Foundation of Black Americans in particular, in the state of California. It could cost California more than $800 billion to compensate Black residents for generations of over-policing, disproportionate incarceration, and housing discrimination, economists have told a state panel considering reparations. They need to go back further than that, because it's not just for over-policing, disproportionate incarceration, and housing discrimination. We're going way, 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 way back. So when they do those calculations, it's probably going to be more than $800 billion. The preliminary estimate is more than 2.5 times California's $300 billion annual budget and does not include a recommended $1 million per older Black resident for health disparities that have shortened their average lifespan. Nor does the figure count compensating people for property unjustly taken by the government or devaluing Black businesses, two other harms the task force says the state perpetuated. See, that's exactly what I just said. I said it's most likely going to be more. And here's the thing. If they would have just did right by Black people and didn't treat us the way that they did, we wouldn't even be having this conversation right now. So as far as I'm concerned, they picked that hole to dig themselves into. And then not only did they not stop digging, they kept going even further and further and further. You know how when you bury someone, they say 6 feet deep? They kept going past 6 feet. Black residents may not receive cash payments anytime soon, if ever, because the state may never adopt the economist's calculations. Of course, because it's Black people. If it was anybody else, they'll find a way. I mean, look at all the money they sent over to Ukraine. The Reparations Task Force is scheduled to discuss the numbers Wednesday and can vote to adopt the suggestions or come up with its own figures. The proposed number comes from a consulting team of 5 economists and policy experts. We've got to go in with an open mind and come up with the creative ways to deal with this, said Assembly member Reggie Jones Sawyer, one of 2 lawmakers on the task force responsible for mustering support from state legislatures and Governor Gavin Newsom before any reparations could become reality. In an interview prior to the meeting, Jones Sawyer said he needed to consult budget analysts and other legislators and the governor's office before deciding whether the scale of payments is feasible. The estimates for policing and disproportionate incarceration and housing discrimination are not new. The figures came up in a September presentation as the consulting team sought guidance on whether to use a national or California-specific model to calculate damages. But the task force must now settle on a cash amount as it nears a July 1st deadline to recommend to lawmakers how California can atone for its role in perpetuating racist systems that continue to undermine Black people. For those who support reparations, the staggering $800 billion amount economists suggest underscores the long-lasting harm Black Americans have endured, even in a state that never officially endorsed slavery. Critics pin their opposition partly on the fact that California was never a slave state and say current taxpayers should not be responsible for damage linked to events that germinated hundreds of years ago. Here's the thing. Their taxpayers' monies is going over to other places all the time, but they ain't complaining about that. But we know why. Task force recommendations are just the start, because ultimate authority rests with the state assembly, senate, and the governor. That's going to be the real hurdle, said Senator Stephen Bradford, who sits on the panel. How do you compensate for hundreds of years of harm, even 150 years post-slavery? Financial redress is just one part of the package being considered. Other proposals include paying incarcerated inmates market value for their labor, establishing free wellness centers, and planting more trees in black communities, banning cash bail, and adopting a K-12 black studies curriculum. No, just no. On that other part, that part beyond the financial part, no. And it's funny they talking about and complaining about how they don't know how they're going to pay it, but they managed to find a way to have given money to all these other groups who have dealt with issues inside and outside of the establishment that doesn't even come close to what we have dealt with. But they find money for them all the time. And every excuse as to why they can give it to them as well. And then find every excuse of why we should not get anything. Governor Newsom signed legislation in 2020 creating the Reparations Task Force after national protests over the death of George Floyd, a black man at the hands of Minneapolis police. White federal initiatives have stalled cities, counties, and other institutions have stepped in. An advisory committee in San Francisco has recommended $5 million payouts, as well as guaranteed income of at least $97,000 and a personal debt forgiveness for qualifying individuals. Supervisors expressed general support, but stopped short of endorsing specific proposals. They will take up the issue later this year. The statewide estimate includes $246 billion to compensate eligible black Californians whose neighborhoods were subjected to aggressive policing and prosecution of black people in the war, quote-unquote, war on drugs from 1970 to 2020. That would translate to nearly $125,000 for every person who qualifies. The numbers are approximate based on modeling and population estimates. The Economist also included $569 billion to make up for the discriminatory practice of redlining and housing loans. Such compensation would amount to about $223,000 per eligible resident who lived in California from 1933 to 1977. The aggregate is considered a maximum and assumes all 2.5 million people who identified as black in California would be eligible. Redlining officially began in the 1930s when the federal government started backing mortgages to support home buying, but excluded majority black neighborhoods by marking them red on internal maps. The racial gap in home ownership persists today, and black-owned homes are frequently undervalued. Redlining officially ended in 1977, but the practice persisted, which is why we've heard stories where, like that couple, for instance, who had to use their white female friend for the appraisal, like them doing those appraisals, that's nothing but a modern day form of redlining. When they be giving them bad appraisal rates on their homes, where they lower it instead of giving it what it should actually be, maybe even possibly more. But when that quote unquote white friend steps in, then that's when they give them like millions of dollars in an appraisal. Monetary redress will be available to people who meet residency and other requirements. They must also be descendants of enslaved and free black people in the U.S. as of the 19th century, which leaves out black immigrants, as it should, because they don't qualify. And that is that. In their report, the consultants suggest the state task force err on side of the generosity and consider a down payment with more money to come as more evidence becomes available. It should be communicated to the public that the substantial initial down payment is the beginning of a conversation about historical injustices, not the end of it, they said. Well, hey, I suggest they hop to it. Hey, again, it's not black people in California's fault that they racked up all of this money of how much it's going to cost. And like I said, $800 billion, that's the minimum. I truly believe that it's more than that. It's not, as far as I'm concerned, it's probably almost at $1 trillion. Probably more than that. But see, like I said, they just don't want to pay up. They do not want to pay what they owe. What did Riley say in the Boondocks? Santa gonna pay what he owe? Well, that's what California is going to have to do. But what they're afraid of, like, again, I believe in domino effects, is that this is going to trickle down and many other places are going to follow suit if this goes through. And that's what they are scared of. That's what they do not want. Well, guess what? It's at the point where it's not about what they want. It's about what we want. It's about what we need and about what we're going to get, whether they like it or not.